Hi, I'm Greg, welcome to FX Studio, and welcome to the second and final part in the conversion of my 1976 Silverface 100-watt Fender with reverb and vibrato, the Blackface specs, where we investigate the quality of capacitors and look at the lead dress, which is the layout of the wires. Depending on whose recollections and opinions you're hearing, the quality of Fender electronics dropped almost as soon as CBS took over. The decrease in quality was more gradual, or the quality dropped and then came back up slightly. The reason for the decrease was due to the engineers and accountants not understanding that tone is important, and that amps, and guitars for that matter, are more than just utilitarian devices. Amps don't just make the guitar louder, but shape the tone and are at least as important as the guitar when it comes to the quality of tone. Apparently a lot of the engineers CBS brought in had worked in aviation, where the main consideration is making sure everything works and nobody dies. The accountants, being there to help maximise profits, couldn't see how the type of pickup wire, quality of wood or brand of capacitor mattered, which would have been supported by the engineers only being concerned that they functioned correctly. So no surprise, they went with the cheaper options and quickest method of construction. I reread the section on CBS amps in Soul of Tone and the mod section of the Tube Amp book, and the experts agreed in saying that the reason for any decrease in sound quality were the changes to the phase inverter to make the amps cleaner and louder, bias circuit so they could use cheaper tubes, use of cheaper capacitors and messier lead dress. There are a lot of voltages running around in an amp, and poorly executed placement of the wires, the lead dress, can lead to unpleasant and unwanted oscillation. I was hearing the oscillation in the full volume clips in the last video. Even after the Blackface conversion, there were still some unpleasant overtones. In the previous video, we heard the minor tonal difference from changing the phase inverter and preamp voltages, and the massive change from removing the master volume circuit and particularly removing the 0.01 microfarad coupling capacitor before the phase inverter and replacing it with a 0.001 cap. I'm going to look at the lead dress later, so the only thing that could change the tone is the choice of capacitors. Probably the thing people have the strongest opinion on. There seem to be equal numbers of people who agree with the CBS engineers and accountants and feel there is no difference in tone as long as they have the same capacitance reading. Then there are others who insist they hear a difference. Given the strong opinions on the effective capacitor type, I was a little surprised to see it mentioned as an issue by so many of the experts in the Soul of Tone and Tube Amp books. I made a video comparing capacitors in a Tweed champ circuit a couple of years ago. There were slight differences, but in hindsight, 2 coupling capacitors wasn't enough to really hear much of a change. I previously removed the circuit boards and rebuilt my 68 custom Princeton using high quality capacitors, sticking with the stock transformers, and it sounds 5 to 10% better. Unfortunately, I didn't remember to record a before and after clip to prove it. Unless hand wiring to a turret board sounds better, the only thing that could change the tone was the capacitors. I did a video comparing capacitors and guitars and found that caps that had higher capacitance readings didn't always sound darker than those with lower readings. So I have no doubt that different construction types do vary in tone and that we can hear the difference, even if it's often subtle. Subtle changes do of course add up. What's unknown is how the original capacitors from the 70s compare to modern high-end models. Less good vintage models from when lots of things ran on valves could sound better than high-end modern versions. To find out, I replaced the coupling and tone control capacitors with a set of Sozo copies of the original blue Mallory caps used in Brownface and the first Blackface Fenders, plus a silver mica 250 picofarad cap in the treble circuit. These are the same clips, mic and cab setup from the first video with the original caps after the Blackface conversion and then new tone and coupling capacitors. I'm going to play the original clip followed by the modified one and then back to the original this time as it better helps us discern any changes. very minute change. The originals seem to smear the sound a tiny bit, where the new ones appear to be slightly crisper and more focused. That's hearing them side by side in here, which is not your average listening environment. So pretty much no change, which would suggest that even the cheaper capacitors used in the Silverface era were as good as modern high quality versions. In which case, having heard a definite improvement in my reissue Princeton means the originals sound better than the generic ones used in modern Fenders, and the stock ones in the Princeton didn't sound bad. I'm hearing a harder top end with the new caps that I'm not sure I like, which I find interesting as I've often seen talk of how silver mica caps are supposed to sound significantly better than ceramic types. Leo Fender never used silver mica, only ceramic. No idea if he ever compared them, probably not. I did read that the stock blue caps in the 70s, as found in this, sound better than the reddy brown ones used in the first Silverface amps, and that after complaints about the drop in quality of tone, they changed to these blue blobs. So the other question is, do they break in with use? If it's true that capacitors break in and start sounding better, we're comparing 45 years to 0 hours usage. Those two clips were literally the first sounds played through the new capacitors. To find out one way or the other, I ran the CD of Guitar on Repeat into the amp for a day or so, and then swapped to some more aggressive full band CDs to really hit them hard. So this is after around 200 hours of music playing through the amp, which is a fair amount of time, although nothing compared to 48 years. Not that the amp was running constantly for 48 years, apparently it was in storage for the last 24. I had a different set of output tubes in it running into a dummy load, so the tubes wouldn't change. By the way, when running into the dummy load, using a CD, you can hear the music coming from the output tubes, similar to what you hear from a record with a needle running over the grooves and the amp not turned on. They produce an acoustic signal. This is before and after the breaking in of the capacitors. After that, the broken-in Sozos sound a tiny bit better than they did. I'm talking a very negligible difference though, and once again that's only comparing them side by side in here. So while the Sozos are a bit better, there's nothing wrong with the quality of the original capacitors. The last thing to address is the lead dress or layout of the wires. You only have to compare a picture of a Blackface Twin to this one to see what a mess it was. With the Tweed and Blackface layouts, the higher voltage wires ran underneath the board closer to the grounded chassis. I've always assumed that helps control unwanted electrical interference, as it's similar to shielding. Everything is wired from the top in these, which you can see was a deliberate decision. They've done things like adding extensions to where the 100k plate resistors link to the power supply, so they can wire them from above. They clearly knew the layout affected the performance, as in some of the amps they added capacitors to filter out the extra noise. They also did things like using loops of wire that are connected to ground around groups of wire, as you can see here, in an attempt to better insulate them, creating a Faraday cage, none of which was needed with the original Blackface layout. I moved the voltage rectifier and bias board over to the top corner where Leo Fender always placed them. I removed the power supply leads from on top of the board and put them underneath as per the originals, which was the hardest part of the conversion. I needed to remove some of the other connections to be able to get underneath. I shortened the number of wires that were excessively long and added some shielded wires from the preamps to the mixing resistors. Here it is with the lead dress neatened up compared to where it was after the cap break-in. No question it sounds better. Not the chalk and cheese type difference people sometimes talk about, but an obvious and significant improvement. It didn't sound terrible before, and neither setting on the controls I started with were particularly great, so we could really hear what was changing. Clean sounds don't reveal ugly harmonics and overtones the same way dirt does. The amp won't be as collectible not being all original, although it wasn't collectible anyway, having had the 15-inch speaker changed to a pair of 12s. I've kept all the parts if anybody does want to return it to stock in the future. I'm into tone, not a collector, so it's way more valuable to me as it is. The reality is, certainly around here, the price of larger amps has dropped enormously in recent years. As with the improvements in sound reinforcement technology, people no longer need that much volume to be heard. I measured the amp at 120 dB at 1 meter during one of the full volume recordings. They're also incredibly heavy to lug. After the modifications, some extra parts like a new foot switch, logo, output tubes, and most importantly a new set of removable casters so it can be moved safely, this has cost me about half the price of a new reissue. Obviously that would have cost more if I was paying a tech to do the work. They'd probably resist fixing the lead dress too, but that was clearly worth it. So now that's completed, I can move mics, cabs and settings on the amp and dial in some better sounds and start enjoying it. I can also check the health of the preamp tubes, as some of those are very old and I suspect may not be at their best. Once I started, I wasn't going to do anything that would change the tone, so we were only hearing the changes to the circuit. As I said in the first video, if I was only doing one mod, I would change the 0.01 coupling capacitor between the mixing resistors and phase inverter for the 0.001 microfarad cap. I wouldn't worry about the coupling and tone control capacitors. I would definitely change the electrolytic capacitors in the power supply if they were original. I can't speak for the earlier Silverface models with the reddy brown caps that aren't supposed to be as good as these ones, as I haven't compared them. Considering these blue blobs aren't supposed to sound good, I suspect the reddy brown ones are probably fine too though. Ultimately, it's a whole lot of minor changes that add up to making them sound better, and as we've heard, most changes were fairly subtle. So for our final comparison, this is the stock circuit with only the bias modified and the brand new output tubes compared to how it sounds now. Would I do this again? Yes, definitely. The amp sounds much better now. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon when you subscribe so you get the notification when I make more of these, and I'll see you soon.